The story begins at Regardin Magical Academy, where magical talent is valued above everything else. However, one student, Will Surfert, is determined to prove that strength is not measured by magic alone as he fights powerful monsters in dangerous dungeons using only his swordsmanship. At the magical capital of Urbus Regardin, Professor Edward Surfence conducts a practical lesson and calls on 6th-year student Will to perform a simple spell. Unable to use magic, Will fails the exercise and becomes the target of his classmates' ridicule. Meanwhile, the gifted Sion effortlessly casts the spell from his seat, further highlighting the gap between them. After class, Sion and his friends continue mocking Will until his classmate, Colette, steps in to defend him, leaving Will grateful for her support. As Will gazes at the sky, he reflects on the ancient legend of how humanity was once trapped beneath endless darkness while the celestial host ravaged the world. Everything changed when 5 legendary mages defeated the invaders and sealed the heavens, earning the prestigious title of Magia Vander. Since then, countless mages dream of reaching that rank. Among them is Will's childhood friend, Elfaria, who becomes the youngest Magia Vander in history, while Will continues struggling to move forward without magic. Later, Will visits Professor Werkner's office, where he is scolded for recklessly entering the 7th floor dungeon alone. Despite the lecture, Werkner rewards him with 2 credits for defeating a powerful monster. He also reminds Will that earning enough praxis alone is not enough to advance to the Upper Institute, especially for someone who cannot use magic. Still, Werkner secretly informs him about a Baskerville lurking on the 6th floor, worth 4 credits, giving Will a chance to recover from his poor exam results. Unfortunately, Sion overhears the conversation and decides to eliminate the monster first, hoping it will finally force Will out of the academy. Soon after, Sion and his 2 companions venture into the 6th floor dungeon, only to encounter the terrifying Sentinel, a monster worth at least 10 credits. The creature easily defeats Sion's allies with a single punch, while Sion's magic proves completely ineffective. Watching from nearby, Will hesitates to help the boy who constantly bullies him. However, he remembers Elfaria once telling him that his kindness is his greatest strength. Determined to become someone worthy of standing beside her, Will rushes into battle. Will clashes with the Sentinel at incredible speed, astonishing even Professor Edward, who witnesses the fight through a magical orb. Professor Werkner explains that Will is a true outlier, possessing superhuman physical abilities far beyond what ordinary mages can achieve. In the end, Will overwhelms the Sentinel with a sword strike faster than lightning itself, earning all 10 credits from Professor Werkner for his remarkable victory. The story then flashes back 5 years earlier when Will is only 10 years old. Even then, his classmates constantly mock him, claiming he is nothing more than bait to bring Elfaria to school. Now that Elfaria has become a Magia Vander, they insist he is completely useless because he cannot use magic. Refusing to accept their words, Will proves them wrong by dodging countless spells with unbelievable speed before overwhelming the Academy's headmistress in a training exercise using nothing but a single dagger. Back in the present, Professor Werkner explains to his class that there are only 2 ways to earn recognition from the Upper Institute. The first is to create an entirely new form of magic, a feat only a handful of students can ever accomplish. The second is to accumulate at least 7,200 Academy credits, making it the only realistic path for most aspiring mages. Meanwhile, Professor Edward meets with the headmistress and argues that Will should be expelled since he cannot use magic despite dreaming of becoming a Magia Vander. Instead of agreeing, the headmistress asks Edward to judge Will's abilities for himself. Confident in his own strength, Edward accepts the challenge, declaring that unlike Professor Werkner, he will show Will no mercy. Edward later finds Will in the study hall and escorts him to the spell hall, where he proposes a brutal test. If Will can land even a single hit on him, he will receive 5 spell hall credits. However, if he fails, he will be expelled from the academy. After hearing about the challenge from the headmistress, Professor Werkner desperately wants to intervene but is forbidden from interfering. He can only watch anxiously, knowing Edward is one of the strongest mages in the academy and an ascendant who has already climbed close to the top of the tower. The duel begins with Edward completely overwhelming Will through an endless barrage of incredibly powerful spells. Despite being pushed to his limits, Will refuses to give up. Thanks to Colette retrieving his sword, he finally gains an opening, weaving through the relentless attacks with incredible agility before striking Edward across the face. Though the wound is only a small cut, Edward silently acknowledges Will's determination, awards him the promised 5 credits, and walks away without another word. While delivering newspapers outside the academy, Will notices a special request issued by Elfaria. Realizing she needs a large number of Frostwalker ice cores as magical catalysts, he immediately rushes back to his dorm and asks his roommate, Rosti, an artificer, to prepare a few magical tools for him. After receiving the items, Will heads straight for the fourth-floor dungeon to gather the materials himself. Inside the dungeon, Will sees many students using magic to defeat Frostwalkers and harvest their ice cores, including Scion and his group. Choosing not to compete with the others, he ventures deeper into the dungeon instead. Along the way, he rescues a female student named Iris from a pack of Frostwalkers with his sword, leaving her astonished by his combat skills and grateful for his timely rescue. As the two continue forward, they encounter the Frost Rex, the strongest evolution of the Frostwalker species, and a monster worth 6 credits. Will tells Iris to stay back while he confronts the beast alone. Knowing the Frost Rex is vulnerable to fire, he uses the magical tools Roasty created to unleash explosive flame attacks. The strategy works perfectly, allowing Will to defeat the monster with ease before claiming its valuable core. After the battle, it is revealed that Iris is actually an envoy from the top of the tower. She later reports the entire encounter to the Magia Vander, praising Will as a promising talent worthy of recognition. Her recommendation immediately divides the legendary mages, with 2 opposing the idea while 1 supports giving him a chance. Throughout the discussion, Elfaria remains silent, already aware of Will's potential because she is the one who originally sent Iris to observe him. At Regarden Magical Academy, students must earn at least 7,200 of the Academy's 12,000 available credits to qualify for the Upper Institute. As many students successfully defeat golems and surpass the required benchmark, Will struggles to overcome his own opponent. With only 5,405 credits in his final year, his dream of advancing seems farther away than ever. Not long after, one of the Academy's top 3 students, Julius, coldly tells Will to stay out of his sight. His followers boast that Julius will surely be scouted during the upcoming Grand Magic Festival, further emphasizing the gap between the 2 students. Later in the Academy cafeteria, Colette reveals that she has given up on competing in the Sky Race and has decided to focus entirely on the Duel event instead. Iris then explains that the Grand Magic Festival is held once every 2 years, attracting powerful mages from the top of the tower to scout promising students. She also reveals that the tower is divided into several powerful factions, including the Lightning Lord's Wand, led by Thorsius Fasci, the Sacred Elf Wand, led by Elif Kanan, the Flame Emperor's Wand, led by Incendia Barham, and the Ice Maiden Wand, led by Albus Vina. Aside from the Light Sovereign's Wand, led by Mistoria's Noah, these factions are commanded by the current Magia Vander. Any student chosen by one of these factions earns the opportunity to ascend to the top of the tower. While exploring the academy, Will and Iris discover a hidden staircase leading to an underground gambling arena, where students place bets on which participants will be selected by the tower's scouts. There, they also run into Sion and his companions who are keeping a close eye on the competition. After classes end, Will heads to Slumlin Street on the outskirts of Urbus Regarden, where he works part-time at Gina's Tavern. The establishment is a lively gathering place for hard-working dwarven miners, whose laughter fills the streets every evening. Rosti later questions why Will continues working such a poorly paid job when Professor Werkner could easily help him find better employment. However, Will explains that the dwarves have always treated him with kindness and respect, and he has no desire to burden Professor Werkner with his personal problems. Before long, Julius and his followers arrive at the tavern and begin insulting both the dwarves and Will. Refusing to tolerate the disrespect, Will steps forward and demands that Julius apologize. Julius responds by attacking him with ice magic before proposing a challenge at the Grand Magic Festival, promising to humiliate Will in front of everyone. Without hesitation, Will accepts the duel, but declares that if he wins, Julius must apologize to every dwarf in the tavern. The Grand Magic Festival officially begins as the Academy's headmistress welcomes the participants. Among the audience, the 4 major factions of the tower gather to scout the most promising students. Liliana claims victory in the Sky Race, while Will and Colette prepare to compete in the Crown Attack. Hoping to strengthen their chances, Colette invites Scion to join their team, but the moment he realizes Will is also a member, his mood immediately turns sour. Soon, several elves use powerful magic to transform the arena into a massive battlefield divided into 5 regions: the Volcano Zone, Marshland Zone, Badlands Zone, Grasslands Zone, and Enchanted Woods. The event is a 3-person team competition in which every squad starts from the edge of the field and races toward the central stadium. At the heart of the arena rests a single crown, and the first team to claim it wins. However, countless traps and obstacles stand between the competitors and their goal. As the competition begins, Will's team encounters a large army of golems. Using Colette's magic to form a powerful gauntlet around Will's fist, he shatters the entire group with a single devastating strike, leaving both the spectators and the tower's scouts in complete disbelief. Maintaining their momentum, the team quickly reaches the Badlands. There, Colette creates several magical swords, allowing Will to destroy another series of deadly traps with overwhelming speed. His incredible performance catches the attention of the scouts, while Julius and his teammates also take notice. Even so, Julius remains unfazed and confidently pushes ahead. Before long, Will's squad reaches the Enchanted Woods, the final area before the central stadium. Will effortlessly avoids the dark magic traps prepared by Professor Edward, but realizes this is where clashes with rival teams become unavoidable. Moments later, Julius suddenly launches a surprise attack, narrowly missing Will. Although shocked to find Julius waiting there, despite their carefully planned hit-and-run strategy, Will quickly prepares himself for battle. Julius immediately unleashes a relentless barrage of powerful ice attacks, forcing Will onto the defensive as he searches for an opening. At that moment, Sion unexpectedly joins the fight by casting a massive fire spell that engulfs the entire forest. With Colette's support, Will barely manages to block the overwhelming flames. As the battlefield descends into chaos, Julius turns his attention toward Colette, while Sion finally gets the one-on-one battle with Will that he has always wanted. A brief flashback to the past, when Will is constantly bullied by the other students. Hoping to ease his suffering in his own way, Sion offers to let Will become one of his followers. However, Will rejects the offer without hesitation, declaring that his only goal is to reach the top of the tower. Feeling insulted by the rejection, Sion begins harboring resentment toward Will from that day onward. Back in the present, Sion relentlessly bombards Will with powerful flame spells, but Will focuses entirely on evasion. Unwilling to fight his own teammate, he remembers the promise he made to Mr. Donovan and the dwarves. As the two continue clashing instead of working together, the scouts watching from above grow increasingly disappointed by the team's internal conflict. Meanwhile, Iris joins Rosti in the audience, and the two continue cheering Will on despite the unfavorable situation. Elsewhere on the battlefield, Julius appears in several locations at once, using magic to delay rival teams. However, one of the Academy's top 3 students, Wignall, effortlessly defeats one of the Juliuses and discovers that it leaves behind an ice core, revealing that the Julius confronting the other teams is merely a magical copy. The battle between Will and Sion intensifies as Sion unveils a Flame Guardian Falcon, a powerful magical construct capable of attacking at high speed, while rapidly regenerating from damage. Even Will struggles against the relentless assault, leaving Professor Edward impressed by Sion's extraordinary mastery of magic. The scouts from the Flame Emperor's faction are equally astonished and immediately decide to report Sion's talent to their leader. Realizing that Sion desperately wants his acknowledgement, Will finally decides to stop holding back. Sion unleashes a devastating large-scale attack while commanding the Flame Guardian Falcon to charge at full power. In response, Will breaks through the assault, destroys the Falcon by striking its core, and rushes straight towards Sion. Before either of them can continue, Colette suddenly intervenes with her earth magic. Although her uniform is torn after defeating Julius's magical copy, she successfully separates the two and urges Will to continue toward the objective. Frustrated but unable to argue, Sion reluctantly steps aside. Moments later, Julius's team becomes the first to reach the central stadium. Just as victory seems within his grasp, Will astonishes everyone by making an incredible leap over the massive stadium walls and landing directly inside the arena, where he immediately confronts Julius for the final showdown. Meanwhile, at the top of the Wizard Tower, Elfaria is approached by her aide Sarissa, who presents several promising candidates for the Ice faction. Among them, Julius receives the most attention, with many believing he has the potential to become Elfaria's successor. Back in the arena, Will confronts Julius and his teammates. Julius immediately fills the battlefield with a thick smokescreen before summoning numerous icy clones of himself, astonishing both the audience and the scouts. The spectators soon recognize the technique as El Glace Frost, one of Elfaria's legendary masterpiece spell that gave rise to the concept of serial magic. Shocked to see Julius wielding such an advanced technique, Will asks where he learned it. Julius arrogantly dismisses Elfaria's abilities, claiming his talent alone allowed him to master the spell and that he will prove she is nothing special. Enraged by Julius' disrespect, Will shatters the ice binding him and charges forward. Julius retaliates by trapping him once more before unleashing a gigantic ice spell that completely freezes Will inside a massive block of ice. The crowd is left speechless as Julius proudly proclaims himself to be Elfaria's rightful successor. Moments later, however, Will bursts free from the frozen prison, effortlessly evades the incoming attacks, and defeats Julius's teammates, causing the icy clones they secretly maintained to disappear. Looking directly at Julius, Will declares that someone like him is unworthy of succeeding Elfaria. Watching from the tower, Elfaria quietly tells Sarissa that she has never desired a successor. Instead, She has always longed for a lone sword. Refusing to admit defeat, Julius creates 4 more icy copies, convinced that Will can no longer identify the original. To his disbelief, Will immediately attacks the real Julius. When Julius demands to know how he can see through the spell so easily, Will reveals that he and Elfaria grew up together as orphans, and that he knows every detail of her magic. He even explains that Elfaria created this very spell when she was only 2 years old, leaving everyone in complete shock. Driven by frustration, Julius increases the number of clones to 8. Will calmly remarks that he spent his childhood enduring 10 copies of Elfaria at once, making Julius's techniques seem trivial by comparison. He swiftly destroys every clone before delivering a powerful punch that knocks Julius unconscious. While the fierce battle captures everyone's attention, Wignall quietly reaches the center of the arena, claims the crown, and wins the crown attack event. Watching from afar, Sion witnesses Will's victory over Julius and becomes even more determined to surpass him. Although Colette is disappointed that their team loses the competition, she congratulates Will on his incredible performance. Will apologizes for failing to secure the crown but reminds her that he still fulfills his promise by defeating Julius and defending the honor of the dwarves. Later that day, everyone celebrates Will's hard-earned victory together. By the following morning, his reputation around the academy has completely changed. As Will walks through the hallway with Colette, several students suddenly invite him to join their groups. Colette immediately calls them out for ignoring Will until now, but Will is simply happy that people finally want to be friends with him. The students then tease Colette, accusing her of keeping Will all to herself. To cheer her up, Will promises to take her on a date the next day. The promise leaves Colette so excited that she can barely sleep, while Will tells Rosti about it, only for his jealous roommate to insist on tagging along. The next day, Colette arrives early, excited for their date. Will soon arrives and apologizes for being late, but before they can enjoy the moment, Rosti suddenly appears and announces that he will be joining them. Throughout the outing, Rosti constantly monopolizes Will's attention, leaving Colette feeling like a third wheel. Unable to hold back any longer, she asks Will if Rosti is really a man because of how clingy he is. Will assures her that Rosti is indeed a guy and quickly calms the situation. Later, Will unexpectedly runs into Liana, who takes him to a tea house where several students who have always looked down on him are waiting. She declares that her team needs Will because he possesses abilities none of them have. Determined to become a Mage Evander, Liana convinces the others to accept him, and Will agrees to join the team. Soon afterward, he informs Colette that he will be participating in the all-student praxis with Liana's group. When the event begins, the students receive their briefing before being transported to a dungeon base camp, where they must survive all the way to the 10th floor to prove themselves worthy of becoming Mage Evander. The all-student praxis finally begins, and with Colette joining Liana's team, she sets off alongside Will and the others. As they venture deeper into the dungeon, a swarm of giant ants attacks. Just as Will prepares to fight, Wignall tells him to stand down while Liana wipes out the entire swarm with a single enchantment spell. The group continues forward, overcoming obstacle after obstacle, but Wignall handles every challenge before Will can contribute. Watching his teammates do all the work, Will quietly hopes for a chance to prove himself. During a break, Colette serves food, but Wignall refuses to take it from her hands, ordering her to place it on the ground instead. He openly admits he only respects Liana, looking down on Will and Colette because they are not elves. Although Liana tries to correct him, Wignall ignores her, and the group resumes their journey. Soon, Liana reveals their true objective is to defeat the boss on the 10th floor. Taking a shortcut, they arrive quickly, but the floor boss suddenly attacks. Wignall becomes its first target, forcing Will to shield him. The monster's overwhelming strength shatters the ground, sending the entire team crashing into the 11th floor, a deadly area meant only for first-class mages. Separated from the others, Will and Wignall search for their teammates. Although Wignall wants to wait for rescue, Will refuses, reminding him they have less than 24 hours to escape. Outside the dungeon, the floor 10 boss kills several instructors, prompting the academy to launch an emergency rescue mission. As the two continue searching, 8 demon spirits suddenly surround them. Wignall freezes, but Will immediately defeats every demon spirit, saving his life. Witnessing Will's incredible strength firsthand, Wignall realizes he has completely underestimated him. Setting aside his pride, he admits he is not as exceptional as everyone believes, while Will reveals he has survived situations like this before. From that moment on, Wignall places his trust in Will and follows his lead in searching for the rest of the team. As they continue searching for their teammates, Wignall finally opens up about his past. He reveals that his own family has always considered him a disgrace because, despite being an elf, he is born with illusion magic instead of the powerful abilities expected of his bloodline. Branded as a failure his entire life, Wignall grows up doubting himself and believing his magic is worthless. He explains that he only stays with Liana's group because they are all looked down upon in one way or another and are simply trying to prove themselves. But after everything that has happened, he admits he no longer believes he has what it takes to survive the dangers of the 11th floor. To Wignall's surprise, Will immediately tells him that he believes in him. The words leave him speechless, as he cannot understand why someone would encourage him instead of looking down on him. Will simply says that beneath Wignall's cold personality, he knows he is a good person, and since they are both chasing the same dream, there is no reason not to trust him. Moments later, another monster appears, and Will insists that Wignall's illusion magic is the key to defeating it. Although Wignall hesitates after years of being told his magic is useless, Will refuses to let him give up. As Will keeps the monster occupied, Wignall casts his illusion spell, but when nothing seems to happen, he nearly loses hope. Remembering the faith Will placed in him, he gathers his courage and gives it everything he has. This time, the illusion takes effect, trapping the monster and creating the perfect opening for Will to finish it with a single strike. For the first time in years, Wignall feels proud of his own magic, and the victory strengthens the trust between the two. Using Rosty's magic map alongside Kiki's keen sense of smell, Will then begins tracking down Liana and Colette. Elsewhere on the 11th floor, Liana blames herself for dragging everyone into such a dangerous situation because of her own ambitions. However, Colette refuses to let her shoulder the burden alone and confidently declares that Will come to rescue them no matter what. Her faith is quickly rewarded as Will and Wignall reunite with Julius and Sion before continuing the search together. It does not take long for them to find the two girls, arriving just in time as a terrifying headless monster prepares to attack. With the team finally reunited, they immediately brace themselves for another life-or-death battle. Working together, the group defeats the headless monster, but before they can figure out a way to escape the 11th floor, they sense another terrifying presence drawing near. Julius immediately suggests retreating while they still can, but Will refuses. He points out that running away will only delay the inevitable since the monster will keep hunting them until it is defeated. To everyone's surprise, the group agrees with Will. Despite her injuries, Liana entrusts him with the role of leader, believing he is the most reliable among them after surviving the dungeon with barely a scratch. Wasting no time, Will assigns everyone their roles, planning to confront the monster head-on while the others support him with Moff from a distance. The moment the creature appears, the team unleashes everything they have, only to watch in horror as every spell and attack proves completely useless. The monster shrugs off their strongest techniques without taking a single scratch. As the battle grows more desperate, Will suffers heavy injuries while protecting his teammates, while Liana is only lightly wounded thanks to him shielding her from a direct attack. During the fight, the group uncovers a horrifying truth. The monster does not belong on the 11th floor at all. Instead, it is a creature from the 25th floor. The revelation leaves everyone in complete shock, unable to understand how such a terrifying monster could have reached this level. With Will temporarily incapacitated, Liana and Sion launch a desperate assault, but even their combined strength fails to leave a mark, pushing the team to the brink of despair. Struggling to stay conscious, Will suddenly asks Julius to punch him. Though confused, Julius angrily obliges, and the blow snaps Will out of his dazed state. Grabbing his sword, Will charges back into battle without hesitation. Sion cannot comprehend how Will continues fighting against such an overwhelming enemy. But Colette explains that Will is just as terrified as everyone else. The only difference is that he refuses to let fear stop him because everyone is counting on him. Even after rejoining the battle, Will realizes that neither his sword nor the other's magic can harm the monster. As he desperately searches for another option, he remembers the special gem Rosty once gave him, a symbol of his family's belief that the wand and the sword should fight as one. Instantly, Will realizes the answer. Without hesitation, he calls for Colette's help. Combining her magic with the gem and his own sword, Will unleashes an entirely new technique. His blade bursts into blazing flames, creating a power unlike anything the others have ever seen. This time, the attack succeeds. The monster is engulfed in flames and begins burning alive, leaving everyone watching in complete disbelief as Will's fiery sword finally overwhelms the creature. After defeating the powerful monster, everyone is left speechless by the incredible power Will unleashes. Before they can recover from the shock, even more monsters begin surrounding them. Fortunately, their professors arrive just in time to save the exhausted students who have already reached their limits. Amid the chaos, Will briefly meets a mysterious boy named Finn. Although the encounter is short, Finn leaves a lasting impression on him. Once the crisis comes to an end, the Academy holds a ceremony to honor the students who survived the dungeon incident, while an investigation begins to uncover who is responsible for turning Liana's expedition into a catastrophe. As Liana and the others recover from their injuries, Will cannot stop thinking about Finn. After asking around, he discovers that Finn belongs to a supporter tribe, a group that specializes in assisting adventurers through the dungeon instead of relying on magic. Even after learning this, Will hopes their paths will cross again someday. Not long afterward, Sion questions Will about the mysterious power he uses to defeat the monster. Unable to satisfy his curiosity, Will admits that he remembers almost nothing because his mind goes completely blank during the battle. Believing their professors might know more, Colette suggests asking them about the strange power Will awakens, convinced it is far beyond ordinary magic. Elsewhere, Finn reports to Headmaster Cauldron and reveals that he successfully reaches the 49th floor of the dungeon. He also mentions meeting Will around the 40th floor and asks about him. Cauldron explains that Will is one of his students who fights by combining swordsmanship with wand techniques instead of conventional magic. Intrigued, Finn asks Cauldron to continue watching over Will, adding that he intends to keep an eye on him as well. Seeing no reason to object, Cauldron agrees later. Sion approaches Will and reminds him of the promise they make inside the dungeon. Now that they both survive and return safely, Sion declares it is finally time to settle their rivalry with a proper duel. Without a moment's hesitation, Will accepts the challenge. As the match begins, Will draws his sword for close combat while Sion prepares to overwhelm him with his powerful magic. On the eve of the final graduation exam at Regarden Magical Academy, the professors are stunned after discovering that Will has been scoring perfect marks in every written test. With only one paper left to grade, they realize he is on the verge of accomplishing the unprecedented feat of ascending the tower, despite being unable to use magic. Even Professor Werkner is amazed after seeing Will earn yet another perfect score. Meanwhile, Will spends every spare moment studying alongside Colette and Rosti, determined to ace the final written exam. If he can earn a perfect score, he will finally have enough credits to ascend the tower and reunite with Elfaria. Later that night, Colette brings him a late-night snack, only to find him asleep over his books. She gently places a cloak over him before admitting to Rosti that she hates the title of Magia Vander because it forces Will to push himself so relentlessly just to see Elfaria again. Rosti quietly agrees. The next morning, Professor Edward oversees the final examination and announces that there will be only one question. Anyone who answers it successfully will receive all 6 available credits. As the papers are distributed, the students discover the question simply asks, "What is magic?" While most mages and elves can at least attempt to explain it, Will realizes that all the knowledge he has spent years studying cannot prepare him for such a question. Fearing he may lose his only chance to reunite with Elfaria, he refuses to give up and writes everything he can think of about magic. After the exam, Professor Werkner confronts Edward over the impossible question, only to learn that nearly 40% of the classes failed, including Will. Finishing with just 7,199 credits, he falls a single point short of qualifying for the tower, shattering the dream he has worked toward for years. Unable to hide his frustration, Will bitterly complains that Professor Edward is unbelievably cruel, while Rosti does his best to comfort him. Elsewhere, Colette and the others search for Will, but Professor Werkner tells them to attend Terminalia, the Academy's year-end festival, assuring them that he will find Will himself. As night falls, the Terminalia festival officially begins. Claire, a high mage from the tower, addresses the crowd and announces that the restoration of the Great Sky Barrier is about to commence. Moments later, the Magia Vander appear in the sky and combine their power to cast the supreme spell, Vandus Terminalia. The barrier is successfully restored, and the crowd erupts in celebration. But their joy is cut short as countless dark magic circles suddenly appear across the sky, unleashing hordes of monsters into the city and throwing the entire festival into chaos. Will quickly realizes that the monsters invading the city are creatures from the deep dungeon. Claire and the Flame faction immediately launch a counterattack, but to everyone's shock, the monsters completely nullify their flame magic and even destroy Claire's magical guardians. It soon becomes clear that these creatures are wielding mage slayers, weapons capable of negating magic itself. The Academy's headmistress then realizes the attack on the city is only a diversion. The invaders' true target is the Wizard Tower, knowing this is the one day each year when the Magia Vander are at their weakest. Even so, Masturias refuses to leave the tower, explaining that if the Great Sky Barrier collapses, the celestial host will return and wipe out humanity. Elsewhere, Iris spots a monster attacking 2 young girls and rushes in to save them, but her magic is instantly nullified. Just before the monster can strike, Will appears and effortlessly severs its arm. As he begins cutting down the invading monsters, Rosti tells him to focus only on those carrying mage slayers, and leave the others to the Academy's mages. Following his advice, Will immediately engages the armed monsters in battle. Meanwhile, Mysterious orders Iris to lift the long-standing combat ban on the dwarves and send them into battle. As Iris relays the command, the dwarves finally join the fight, while Colette and the other students desperately hold back the monsters until reinforcements arrive. At the same time, one of the mysterious enemy mages opens a magical gate, summoning a terrifying monster known as Devander. Claire immediately recognizes it as a notorious creature from the 40th floor, and it quickly proves why, effortlessly overpowering Will in both speed and strength. Mr. Donovan and the dwarves rush in to assist, but the headless enemy mage commands Devander to absorb the remains of the fallen monsters, causing its power to increase dramatically. The enhanced beast overwhelms the dwarves, brutally severs Rosty's arm, and leaves Will powerless despite his relentless barrage of sword strikes. Overcome with despair, Will watches as Devander prepares the finishing blow. At the very last moment, Rosty throws himself in front of the attack, sacrificing his own life to save Will. Witnessing his closest friend die before his eyes, Will lets out a roar of unimaginable rage. Professor Werkner rushes in just in time to rescue the grief-stricken Will, escaping from Devander aboard a flying beast. Meanwhile, seeing the battlefield descend into chaos, Zeo prepares to join the fight but is stopped by the Flame Emperor. At the same time, Elfaria confronts Mysterious and demands that he lift his order. Furious that everyone she cares about, including Will, is in danger, she releases an overwhelming icy aura, determined to protect them. Elsewhere, Kiki informs Colette that Will is in danger, prompting her to rush toward the battlefield with Scion close behind. Meanwhile, Devander charges straight toward the wizard tower. Realizing the monster is powerful enough to kill even the Magia Vander, Claire intercepts it, only to be swiftly struck down. As civilians desperately evacuate and mages struggle to hold back the relentless invasion, the situation grows increasingly hopeless. At that moment, Finn finally arrives and picks up Will's sword before asking Iris where Will is. Not long after, Professor Werkner collapses before Will with a massive wound in his chest. Before losing consciousness, he reveals that Will actually possesses a single magic spell he can use. Finn soon arrives and reassures Will that Professor Werkner will survive. He then drips his own blood onto Will's sword, causing it to radiate a blinding light. The moment Will grasps the blade, his black hair turns completely white as an overwhelming power surges through his body. In an instant, he bursts across the battlefield at blinding speed, cutting down monster after monster with lightning-fast sword strikes. Everyone can only watch in stunned silence as Will unleashes a power unlike anything they have ever witnessed. Will arrives just in time to save Scion from a monster after Scion continues fighting to his very limit. At the same time, Devander charges toward the wizard tower, only to be intercepted by the headmistress. Moments later, Will joins the battle and begins fighting the monstrous creature on equal footing, leaving everyone watching, including the Magia Vander, in complete shock. Watching the battle unfold, the students realize that the very person they once mocked is now risking his life to protect them all. Unsure of how they can help, they are inspired when Sion suddenly shouts words of encouragement to Will. Colette quickly joins in, and before long, the entire academy is cheering for him. Even Professor Edward is stunned by the sight, as countless mages rally behind the only student who cannot use magic. As the fierce battle continues, Will's glowing sword suddenly begins to shatter, putting him at a serious disadvantage. Seeing this, Elfaria creates an ice sword and sends it to him. The moment Will takes hold of it, he undergoes another transformation, drawing out even greater power through Elfaria's magic. With the enchanted blade, he finally cuts through Devander, astonishing the mysterious enemy mages. Watching from above, the Magia Vander realize that Will is not using ordinary magic at all, but the mysterious fifth element. Determined to stop him, the headless mage opens several more gates, unleashing countless monsters onto the battlefield. Unfazed, Will responds with a devastating ultimate ice spell, effortlessly wiping out the entire horde before overwhelming Devander once and for all. As the monster finally falls, the battlefield erupts in relief. Everyone celebrates the end of the nightmare, while Finn watches with excitement, pleased that the outcome surpasses even his own expectations. 3 years earlier, Will meets Rosty for the very first time, and before long, the two become roommates as well as close friends. Back in the present, the headmistress casts a powerful spell that returns Will to his normal state, changing his long white hair back into its usual short black color. At the same time, Professor Werkner regains consciousness, heavily bandaged after the battle. Worried about Will, he is reassured by Professor Edward, who tells him that the headmistress is personally looking after Will and urges him to focus on recovering instead. The students are relieved to learn that Werkner is safe and that Will still be attending the graduation ceremony. After all, no one works harder than he does. Meanwhile, at the Wizard Tower, Iris reports the casualties to Mysterious. He orders each faction to conduct its own investigation, prioritize rebuilding the capital, and questions why no one notices Will, despite him studying at the academy for 6 years. Iris explains that the headmistress deliberately keeps Will hidden until he fully matures. In response, Mysterious assigns Finn to oversee the sword. Soon, every Magia Vander arrives for the meeting except Elfaria. Sarissa excuses her absence, claiming she is suffering from a stomachache. Later, Colette meets Iris while carrying flowers for Rosti. She gently places them into a flowing river, silently saying her farewell to her fallen friend. Not long afterward, Iris warns Finn not to interfere with Will, fearing it will accelerate events and force them to face that mysterious person once again. Finn refuses to back down, declaring that he will take Will no matter what, and that Headmistress Cauldron's little games are finally over. Soon after, the graduation ceremony begins inside the Academy auditorium. The headmistress welcomes the students before Professor Edward announces every graduate, including Will, as they receive their graduation scrolls. The headmistress then reveals the names of the 49 students chosen to ascend the tower. Just before finishing, she announces one final student who qualifies at the very last moment. To everyone's surprise, it is Will. Acknowledging that some people still oppose the decision, she declares that Will creates a brand new spell that saves countless lives, a spell called Courage. She then asks everyone who believes that to applaud him. At first, the hall falls silent until Sion begins clapping. Colette quickly follows, and one by one, the entire auditorium rises to applaud Will's achievement. Watching from her chamber, Elfaria quietly smiles and whispers that she will be waiting for him. At the noble quarters, prestigious clothier, Lae'zel, Colette, and the other successful graduates are fitted with the luxurious colorless Gloria, a robe that symbolizes the rank of a high mage. As everyone celebrates the occasion, Julius grows restless after realizing he still has not received a scouting offer from any faction, especially the Ice faction, while the others have already been selected. Meanwhile, Will visits the Dwarves' Forge, where Mr. Donovan presents him with a newly forged sword called Wist Set Silver. Grateful for Will saving the dwarves during the invasion, Donovan gives him the weapon free of charge. Soon, the graduates gather at the entrance to the Wizard Tower, where Claire opens the gate and leads them to the first floor, known as the Colorless Garden. She explains that it serves as the tower's foundation and acts as a research center for developing new magic. Although only Academy-approved mages are allowed to enter, becoming a permanent resident depends entirely on one's ability. While everyone admires the beautiful surroundings, Sion quietly warns Will not to be fooled by the peaceful atmosphere. The group then enters the pruning ceremonial hall, where they immediately notice the strange expressions of the high mages from each faction. Moments later, the Magia Vander arrive, but instead of acknowledging the students, they deliberately avoid looking at them, including Elfaria, leaving Will confused. Claire then begins the first bloom ceremony as each Magia Vander chooses their prospects, causing the students' colorless Gloria to change into the colors of their respective factions. Everyone is selected except Will and Julius. The previous day, Elfaria argues over why she is forbidden from scouting Will despite everything he accomplishes. Sarissa explains that the order comes directly from the Upper Institute, which decides that Will must first prove himself during the first bloom before any faction is allowed to recruit him. Back in the present, Claire announces that only students chosen by a faction are permitted to ascend the tower, while those left unselected must remain on the first floor to support the outstanding high mages. However, she reveals that the unchosen students will be given one final opportunity to prove themselves. As the trial begins, monsters appear throughout the arena, and the participants must defeat them to earn recognition. Many students attack with magic, but their spells prove ineffective. Julius stands out by defeating the monsters with ease, impressing the factions with his mastery of ice magic. Even so, Elfaria refuses to acknowledge him, leaving Julius wondering if his past treatment of Will is the reason. Meanwhile, Will charges into battle and effortlessly cuts down one monster after another with a single slash. He even uses Julius's stray ice magic to empower Wist Set Silver, allowing him to destroy the remaining monsters with overwhelming precision. Will continues battling the beast with everything he has, but none of his attacks are able to bring it down. As the fight drags on, the judges begin questioning whether someone who cannot use magic should even be allowed to participate in the trial. Without any magic of his own, Will is forced to endure the beast's relentless magical attacks, while every slash from his sword proves completely ineffective against its defenses. Eventually, the judges decide to call the trial to an end. Will, along with several other students, is informed that they will have to take another qualification test in the future. Until then, they are instructed to continue training and improving themselves. Although Will is devastated that he fails to qualify while the rest of his teammates move on, he refuses to let the setback break his spirit. Soon afterward, Will throws himself back into studying magic, convinced that he must understand it better if he hopes to succeed next time. His determination amazes the other students who also fail the examination, and before long, they invite him to train alongside them. Will is just about to accept their offer when Julius suddenly appears and expresses concern for him. Since he has already qualified, Julius offers to personally train Will, assuring him that he is still considered a member of their group despite failing the test. Touched by Julius's kindness, Will gladly accepts the offer, believing he has finally earned Julius's respect. However, Julius has no intention of helping him out of friendship. Instead, he secretly plans to use Will to gain Alfaria's favor and support, intending to discard him once he achieves the position he desires. Completely unaware of Julius's true motives, Will happily begins training alongside him on the training fields of the first floor, convinced that he has found a genuine ally. While training on the field, Will asks Julius why he decides to help him. Julius honestly admits that his only goal is to use Will as a stepping stone to reach the top of the tower, though he also promises that Will grow stronger in the process. Instead of feeling offended, Will is genuinely touched by the answer. Remembering how Julius has always kept every promise he makes, Will believes he is simply helping him in his own way and sincerely thanks him for his kindness. Hearing that only frustrates Julius, who insists that he is not a kind person. However, Will refuses to change his mind, explaining that everyone shows kindness differently, just as Sion and the others have done in the past. Will's words remind Julius of his childhood, when his maid Anna always praises his kind heart and tells him that others admire that side of him as well. The memory leaves Julius confused, wondering why people continue mistaking his selfish actions for kindness. Irritated by the thought, he abruptly walks away. Later that day, Julius is suddenly ambushed by several senior students who are acting under Kreutz's orders to eliminate him. At first, Julius refuses to fight back, believing that he deserves this. However, Will suddenly arrives and drives the attackers back. Shocked by the rescue, Julius asks why he comes to help him, and Will simply replies that he is returning the favor. Before Julius can object, Will steps in front of him and insists on protecting him since he is already injured. Just then, a mysterious young woman appears and effortlessly drives the senior students away. After introducing herself as Ceridwen, she notices that the boys mistake her for a black witch, but she assures them that she has no ill intentions. Without wasting any time, she invites both of them to her home. Meanwhile, the defeated seniors report everything to Kreutz, who immediately orders his followers to search for both Julius and Will. At Ceridwen's house, she reveals Kreutz's true intentions and offers to personally train the two boys so they can become strong enough to survive what lies ahead. She even claims that Alfaria is aware of her plans. Sensing that she is telling the truth, Will accepts her offer, and Julius eventually agrees as well. Wasting no time, Ceridwen begins their training and immediately orders both of them to remove their clothes. Will immediately takes off his clothes as instructed. At first, Julius questions Ceridwen, demanding to know why she asks Will to remove his clothes. However, his attention is quickly drawn to the countless scars covering Will's back. Shocked by the sight, Julius asks where they come from, but even Will is unsure. He simply assumes they are probably from the times he protects Alfaria. Deciding it is time for Will to uncover the truth, Ceridwen uses her magic to send his consciousness back into the past through a dream. Confused, Julius wonders how revisiting old memories could possibly make them stronger, but Ceridwen calmly explains that Will must first confront his past before he can move forward. In the next moment, Will suddenly finds himself back in his younger body, standing inside a forest where Alfaria happily comes to pick him up, promising that she will always protect him. It does not take long for Will to realize that he is reliving his own childhood. Although he knows traveling into the past should be impossible, he concludes that everything happening must be part of the dream created by Ceridwen's magic. As the days pass, Will and Alfaria spend their time happily together, just as they once do. The peaceful memories make Will wish he could return to those carefree days when it is only the two of them without any hardships. Alfaria often tells him stories, and whenever he falls asleep halfway through, she never gets angry. Instead, she gently lets him rest on her lap. The two share countless happy moments until one day, a monster suddenly attacks them. Determined to protect Will, Alfaria confronts the creature with her magic, since Will cannot use any himself. However, after casting several spells, the monster reflects her own magic back at her. Realizing the danger, Will immediately rushes forward and desperately calls for Alfaria to stay behind, but she refuses to retreat. Without hesitation, Will throws himself in front of her, taking the monster's attack directly on his back. The devastating blow leaves him covered in scars before he loses consciousness, finally revealing the truth behind the wounds he carries. Soon afterward, Will finds himself sinking into a vast ocean, where a mysterious book of magic appears before him. As he reaches toward it, it feels as though some unknown power is bestowed upon him. In the next instant he awakens, charges straight at the monster, and defeats it with a single strike. Even Will is stunned by what he accomplishes, but Alfaria simply smiles and tells him that what he uses must be his own form of magic. Moments later, Julius wakes Will from the dream, revealing that he has been asleep for 6 entire days. With the second qualification test about to begin, there is no more time to waste. Before Will leaves, Saradwen asks whether he still remembers the path he follows in his memories. Will confidently replies that he does. Satisfied with his answer, she wishes him good luck as Will sets off, determined to write a different story this time. Before the day of the trial, Will's friends offer to accompany him and support him during the test. However, Sion reminds everyone of the kind of person Will is, saying that he has always overcome every obstacle through his own determination. Believing that Will deserves the chance to prove himself once again, Sion asks the others to trust him and watch him succeed on his own. In the end, they all agree. When the day of the examination finally arrives, the Magia Vander gather to witness Will's qualification test. As the minutes pass without any sign of him, Kreutz begins mocking the situation, convinced that Will has lost his nerve and run away. He confidently declares that someone who fails to appear does not deserve to be recruited into any faction. Just as everyone begins believing the test is over, Will finally arrives alongside Julius. Not far away, Saradwen watches the scene unfold with Finn by her side. The sudden arrival surprises every Magia Vander except Alfaria, who cannot hide her happiness. Julius initially prepares to remain by Will's side, but Alfaria tells him to leave the rest to Will, reminding him that he has already done enough by helping Will reach this point. Julius reluctantly agrees, telling Will to make him proud after everything they have been through together. Will confidently promises that he will. As the trial begins, Will recalls everything he learns during his training and successfully activates his newfound power. Instantly, his sword transforms before everyone's eyes, leaving the Magia Vander stunned, as they struggle to understand how he manages to wield such power on his own. After an intense battle, Will successfully defeats the trial beast and proves that he deserves to pass. However, despite Will's victory, Zeo suddenly steps forward and attacks him anyway, claiming that he wants to personally confirm whether Will is truly worthy of joining a faction. Watching from the sidelines, Alfaria is overcome with fear, uncertain whether Will can survive against someone as powerful as Zeo. To everyone's astonishment, Will withstands the assault and uses the opportunity to charge his sword with energy before unleashing blazing flames from the blade itself. The display leaves the Magia Vander speechless, while Kreutz can hardly believe that Will is capable of wielding such power. Satisfied that Will has proven himself beyond any doubt, Zeo immediately removes Kreutz from his position and officially declares that Will is accepted into the faction. Overjoyed by the announcement, Alfaria rushes straight toward Will and embraces him tightly. Fighting back tears, she apologizes for being unable to help him all this time, but Will gently reassures her that none of it is her fault. Afterward, Zeo immediately demands that Will be handed over to him, insisting that Will belongs to him rather than Alfaria. Hearing that instantly enrages Alfaria. Since Will is still unconscious, she entrusts him to Sarissa before stepping forward to confront Zeo herself. Zeo stubbornly insists that Will should belong only to the victor, and with neither side willing to back down, the two Magia Vander begin fighting. The others try to stop them, unable to believe that two Magia Vander are actually about to battle each other, but neither of them has any intention of listening. Alfaria immediately goes all out, while Zeo responds with the same intensity. She uses her signature magic to create multiple replicas of herself, forcing Zeo to waste time fighting illusions instead of her real body. Watching from a distance, Saradwen quickly realizes what Alfaria is planning. She deduces that the clones are only buying time while Alfaria secretly ascends higher into the sky to prepare her real attack without Zeo noticing. Moments later, Alfaria unleashes her true spell, Chain Circles. The overwhelming force spreads across the battlefield, multiplying its destructive power to such an extent that everyone nearby struggles just to remain standing. Even the spectators are caught off guard by the terrifying pressure generated from the attack. Realizing he can no longer hold back, Zeo becomes completely serious and retaliates with his lightning spear. Although Alfaria narrowly dodges the initial strike, Zio has already predicted where she will appear next. The instant she lands, he attacks again, striking her with tremendous force and sending her crashing straight through one of the tower's massive structures. Everyone watches in horror, desperately hoping that Elfaria survives the devastating blow. Seeing the exchange, Logwell and Kreutz immediately realize that Zio's lightning attacks are even faster than Elfaria's already incredible magic. Kreutz cannot help but acknowledge just how monstrous Zio's true strength really is. The battle rages on as both Magiavander continue exchanging devastating spells. Eventually, Elfaria manages to land a powerful counterattack that finally injures Zio as well. Watching the fight unfold, Julius becomes relieved to see that Elfaria is still holding her own. He immediately wakes Will, wanting him to witness how hard Elfaria is fighting for his sake. As Will regains consciousness, he is confused to find Elfaria locked in battle. Since he is unconscious when the fight begins, he has no idea why the two Magiavander are even fighting. By the time he awakens, however, the battle has already reached its peak. Both Elfaria and Zio are chanting their highest-level incantations, summoning enormous magical creatures that embody their powers as the two colossal beings clash violently against each other. Outside the tower, Professor Edward and Werkner notice the commotion happening inside and immediately figure out who is responsible for causing such chaos. Meanwhile, Elfaria and Zio have just finished their battle, which ends in a draw. Elfaria is already exhausted, while Zio has nearly depleted his magic power. Seeing that neither side can continue, the other professors step in and put an abrupt end to the fight. They decide to settle the matter by taking Elfaria away. Before everything is finalized, Will makes Zio promise never to fight Elfaria again. Keeping his word, Zio officially announces Will as a member of the Lightning faction and tells him to prepare himself, which Will willingly does. Afterward, the members of the Lightning faction celebrate their successful recruitment. However, despite the festivities, Will cannot stop thinking about Elfaria and vows to find a way to see her again. Julius then tells Will that ever since he joined the Lightning faction, Elfaria has been crying constantly and has even tried to run away several times, forcing the others to stop her. Hearing this, Julius vents his frustration at Will for making Elfaria feel that way. Not long after, several members arrive to inform Will that someone is requesting his presence, so Wignall tells him that he has to leave. At that moment, Colette realizes that Emma's words were true, that she is no longer Will's only friend. Seeing how busy Will has become, she quietly begins to feel lonely. Later, Werkner meets with Will once again and congratulates him on his achievement. Will immediately asks if he can see Elfaria because he genuinely cares about her. Instead of answering directly, Werkner tells him that there is another girl who is desperate to meet him. He then secretly leads Will out of the tower, even as a few professors notice them sneaking away. Fortunately, the girl Werkner is referring to turns out to be Elfaria. The two finally reunite and spend some precious time together before Werkner eventually returns to take Will back. Thanks for watching. Check out this next video, and remember to subscribe Annie Zap.